And we're live.
And Jake is muted. Good morning,
You
everyone.
were
How's
muted.
it going?
Jeez. Oh, it's not a WTTA podcast. We don't mute. I muted myself because I was coughing. It's been a minute. I had pneumonia for a couple of weeks. I'm taking an intentional step back from almost everything that I do in my life voluntarily. But what I was trying to say when I was on mute was welcome everybody. If you're listening, downloaded after we've recorded. Thanks for taking time out to listen to what we have to say. It's always flattering to think that people commit time to listening to what we have to say. So appreciate that. And if you find this enjoyable, please share it around so more people can learn stuff. And if you're listening live, same message. We appreciate you taking time out of your morning to listen and contribute. We always enjoy the discussion on the chat. So if you have questions as we're presenting, please drop them in. And it is Orange Friday. The Giants are at home, and my kids' Giants team plays tonight. Everything is clicking, so I'm wearing a Giants shirt. If you can't see that, it's an obnoxious color of blaze orange with an SF on it. Today, we have me, Kevin, Eddie, and Brandon, and we're going to be discussing addictions, both chemical and process. Some people don't know what those are. Eddie has a sweet new WTTA polo that looks really awesome. It looks like he's maybe a Seahawks fan with that battleship gray and neon green, but I think it's I think it's pretty cool looking. Welcome, gentlemen.
How's it going, guys? It's been a minute.
Yeah, welcome back, everyone.
And if
Has
you're
been a
curious
minute.
where Dr. DB is, he's spending time with the family, and apparently Jake is hosting his wife this weekend or something too.
My wife is hosting his wife. I'm not hosting his wife. That would be weird. Yeah, he's on assignment. Where's Mike, by the way? Do we know where Mike is? I was just talking to him last night. I didn't know he wasn't going to be here.
We got another podcast that we're going to pre-record, so he's trying to space it out, I think.
Oh, okay. That makes a lot of sense. Doing back-to-back stuff is really hard, as we know in the clinical world. So, Eddie, you are going to be presenting on the chemical version of addictions. And I think this is the traditional way that people think of addictive patterns of behavior and so forth. Probably dates to well before the formation of Alcoholics Anonymous circa 1935. Because there's biblical stories about people getting drunk. There's, the Iliad and the Odyssey mention it. So I think the maladaptive or otherwise unhealthy patterns of behavior that have to do with substances long predates our professional field's origins. But now we have some criteria, and we typically think of addictions as substances, right? Pills and drink and all that stuff. So you're going to talk about that, and I'll get out of the way so that you can.
Yeah, so today we're talking about the various addictions, and to qualify a little bit about this, I do have my dog is walking around, so if you hear the click clacking, I'm sorry.
He knows where his dog's at.
Yeah, I do have a licensure in working with substance use. But with that said, anyone can become educated on this stuff. The information's readily out there available. My hope today is to try to better explain the mysteries of addiction and actually what is the process of becoming addicted. And also, with the help of Jake, talk about get rid of some of the myths out there, because some people consider things that you can't get addicted to that we know you can because they're not in the DSM. But addictions come in all sorts of manners. That's why if you've ever been on TV or anything near the anything with gambling, you always see if you need help with gambling, call this number. That's more of the process addiction, where the chemical is, like you said, when you think of alcohol, tobacco, cocaine, methamphetamines. So essentially, chemical addiction works because it latches on to the parts of the brain. In order to understand addiction, we need to understand how the brain is set up. A good way of doing this is almost called the hand model. So if you're watching, you can, if I can get my hand in there, think of make a fist and hold up like the wrist section, right? Or can think of it as your spinal cord, and then look into where your hand starts is like the base of the skull. The middle of your palm would be your brain stem, so the part that goes through the middle. And then the top of your fingers would be what we consider the cerebral cortex. The importance of this is that we have different parts of the brain. If you touch your head, where your front of your skull is think of that part of the brain as where like all the higher level of thinking would be. Essentially, this is what separates us from other animals in a sense. Every animal out there has a brain, but humans have really developed this the prefrontal cortex, or the higher level of thinking. If you do various therapies like talk therapy, like the various psychotherapies, and you need this part of the brain has to be firing and connected for it to even work properly. The part of the brain that latches onto addiction, though, is the center, the center in a sense, where that fight or flight response comes from. And what that is, we've talked about it briefly, but I just want to speak on it because it does play a major role in how the chemical addiction works. Is that anytime something happens, anyone has a reaction: fight, flight, or freeze. And with that is usually a chemical reaction that causes an embellishment of, an overproduction of, I'm blanking here for a second, dopamines, because it's a reaction that involve pleasure motivation. So what drugs do, essentially, let's talk about the easiest ones, because everyone here understands tobacco and alcohol. Some of us like to brew it, some of us like to drink it. But what does it actually do? When you are drinking and you're experiencing pleasure, an excess of dopamine is being released into the system. And we have dopamine receptors and we have dopamine producers. And whenever we have an experience that we enjoy, the dopamine is released, it is received, and our body goes, "Ooh, that was a pleasurable experience. I want to do that again." That could be, from watching sports, having sex, walking, being outside, hunting, shooting a gun. All these things do. Now let's talk about stuff that overproduces this and like causes the hijack. Yes, alcohol and tobacco do this, but let's look at some of the higher end stuff: cocaine, crystal meth, methamphetamines, various
Opioids.
Various opioids. Exactly. When the body is taking on these substances, it causes the production of dopamine to skyrocket, and also makes it so that the body doesn't absorb the dopamine in a normal fashion. So that's why like you experience this extreme high. Various things, like every drug has its own effect, so we're not going to worry about the effect of the drug, but like essentially you're going to have this high, a lot of energy, or something effect's going to happen. The body in that time goes, "This was amazing," because it is an experience that it's not usually getting to do. But then when that effect wears off, your dopamine has been like overproduced and hasn't been really received because it was cut off, or hasn't been like absorbed back in the system, so it can't produce more. So that is that low point, or like the withdrawal symptoms that you get from not having various drugs in the body. With that, what it's going to do, though, it's going to tell the body that you need this to survive. That's how, if we have an example I always use when I'm teaching classes. So you have a young woman, with a couple kids, who has $20 to her name. And let's just assume this economy is an absolute crap, so $20 actually buys you food. So say for $20, she can go buy some meth, because that's what her body says I need. Or she can go buy a loaf of bread, some sandwich meat, and maybe some cheese, and fix lunch and food for her kids for the rest of the week. We can look at her and go, "Wow, that is a horrible woman and a horrible mother because she doesn't go and take care of her kids." But what her body is saying is that you need this. You need this to survive. And if you don't get this meth, you're not going to survive. So what does she do? She goes and gets the meth to survive, and then what money's left over, she'll try to take care of her kids once her body's feeling back in this equilibrium normal state. Now we can look at this from an outside thing and know that that is not normal. Absolutely not. The body, the way that it the way that it reacts to each drug creates a dependency. Now let's talk about the things that don't normally like people consider like dependent. And regardless of your belief when it comes to like various cannabises, we're not here to talk about the legalities of them. Are they helpful? They're not helpful, because the answer is yes, they are helpful. The also answer is they're not helpful. But when there is an actual point that cannabis does not have any addictive qualities. That is 100% true. We know that it is not chemically causing a dependency. But what it does is that, say, when I work with my clients a lot, most of them are teenagers. I do work with a few adults, but most of my clients are teenagers. The common thing I always hear when it comes to cannabis, I take it because it helps with my anxiety, it helps with my depression. And does it help with that? Yeah, we can argue that it does. We can also make arguments that it doesn't. That's not the point of this thing. What I'm saying, though, is that when they're taking this drug, that even though it has zero chemical abilities to become addictive, the body then latches on to the fact that I use this to help my body or help myself feel a certain way at a certain time, and it becomes a process of getting past this point. Say, anytime you feel sad, okay, I'm going to go smoke a bowl with friends. And so then your body starts equating sad, I need marijuana. And therefore, when you don't have access to marijuana and you're feeling sad, your anxiety spikes and your body starts going through almost a withdrawal process for not having it. And what this is coming from is the release of various chemicals in the brain. I keep talking about dopamine because that's the big one that a lot of drugs affect, but it's not just the only one that drugs get affected by. Dopamine is really affected a lot by the stimulants of cocaine, crystal meth, methamphetamines. GABA, it's released to reduce the feelings of fear and anxiety. Alcohol does a really good job of affecting that. Hence the reason, everyone goes, the hold my beer effect, and they do something incredibly stupid because it reduces that overall, hey, I should do this, I'm going to die feeling. Serotonin regulates the mood in the body, which is why we've talked about this probably, I think, a month ago when we talked about dealing MDMA assisted therapy or psychedelic assisted therapy, because serotonin allows us to get past the PTSD style symptoms and that really like high, and fear-based, or not, that's GABA's fear, but it gets us past that that all or nothing, everything's going bad, and MDMA overcomes that. There's a couple other ones that go on, but those are the main three that I always like to speak about, especially because we're not doing a deep dive down this. We're just talking about the overall surface. And like I said, the various chemical addictions, the main thing is to realize is that while the drug can cause the fact addictions, really what it's doing is how your body reacts to it and what you're putting yourself through. And the process addiction that we're going to talk about in a second is using the same exact model. It releases various chemicals in the brain, which then cause the brain to latch on to, I need this feeling.
So I guess that's my cue to pick up where Eddie left off, which is that when we're talking about addictions broadly, that you'll notice that the word almost never shows up in the DSM. Only recently in this text revision, maybe it was in the 5 originally, but they said where you can find stuff on anxiety disorders, depressive disorders, whatnot. They have a whole section dedicated to what they call substance use and addictive disorders. So they finally started using the word addiction because addiction is very subjective in its definition, but for colloquial purposes, we all know what it is. And I'm holding this on the screen. You can't see it if you're listening, but the DSM is now, it's pretty thick. It's 1,050 pages long. And the addiction section is the longest chapter of all of them. It's 122 pages. And of the things listed, the way they list them out is they're all sort of spectrumized. It's like mild, moderate, severe. And then it has to do with what substance you're using: alcohol, opioids, cannabis, hallucinogens, etc. There's only one that's not substance related, and it's gambling. Now, so you might hear some people say in the community, wow, video games are not an addiction. Porn is not an addiction. Sex is not an addiction. Softball is not an addiction. Eating is not an addiction. And to Eddie's point earlier, yeah, it absolutely is. Because even though they're not listed in the book, we all know people who can't pull themselves off of their devices. And I'm holding up my phone right here. And, if you're getting a little red in the face, or you feel like we're talking about you, that may be an indicator that you're maybe overusing what you need to set aside from time to time, including the phone. And I'll just say I'm guilty. When my kids are staring at me, and they're 8 and 6 years old right now, and they say, "Dad, can you come do whatever? Come play Legos with me, come outside with me," and I'm on my phone doing whatever it is I'm doing on my phone. And they say, "Oh, sorry, you're doing something." That should ping some embarrassment with me, that I'm choosing the phone over them. And this language of choice, I think, is really important, because it's not to incur any sort of sense of guilt or shame, but it's to put personal responsibility in the lap of the person who's experiencing this. Eddie made a great analogy with the hypothetical lady who's addicted to methamphetamine who chooses meth over her kids. And that absolutely is a choice. Now, to her, it doesn't feel like a choice. In her brain and her body, she's craving this thing. Well, what's interesting is that gambling, video games, sex, eating, cell phone usage, and a whole litany of other things that have nothing to do with ingesting chemicals have the same neurological effect, the same rewiring of circuitry that Eddie's talking about. And a lot of it can be explained by what you're choosing over the alternative. So if we interview a person and we say, what's this pattern of behavior about? And I'm interchanging process versus behavior with regard to these types of addictions. But the important distinction to make, man, I can't speak this morning. It has been a long time since we've done a podcast.
I feel my ADHD was going nuts when I was talking.
The important distinction to make is the difference between ingesting a substance and performing an activity. Okay. So if I have dealt with this before, this is not a made up story. If I have somebody sitting in front of me who's addicted to an extracurricular activity, in this particular case, the gentleman's drug of choice was beer league softball, which he played like 6 nights a week and most weekends. He'd have a tournament. And what it came down to after a thorough, robust biopsychosocial interview was that he had intimacy issues. He didn't have a good sense of self-efficacy. He had vulnerability problems, and he was basically abandoning his wife and kids to go play softball with the boys because he drew a sense of love and affection and accomplishment and achievement by being good at softball 6 nights a week, most weekends had a tournament. And what he was avoiding was home life. So when we got the wife in the room, we had a conversation about it. It was very revealing to learn that, he grew up in a home where he didn't have a strong father figure. His mom was working a lot. And he never learned a healthy attachment style. All he learned was like self-efficacy through doing things, accomplishing things. So when it came time to, date and get married and have kids, he worked through those motions, but ultimately never actually left behind the extracurricular activities and was unable to engage his wife, and his marriage was on the verge of collapse because of softball. So you absolutely can have the same neurological effect where you're chasing a high because your brain has gotten used to that thrill mechanism. You can also have the same type of addictive property based solely on avoidance of something like intimacy. And we see this all the time with kids these days, if I could put that in air quotes, kids these days on their devices. They may look like what has some approximate definition of a relationship to other children online, but they're lacking the interpersonal, in-person interface. So you may have a bunch of surface level interactions with people online through Roblox or Minecraft or Call of Duty or something like that. But what you're actually missing is in-person relationships. And the draw to go back to that is, yes, there's better graphics on screens now, and there's virtual reality, and there's augmented reality, and things in the interweb domain can actually seem more like reality, but the relationships are not. So what are you doing with this particular type of addiction? In my mind, is I think that you're avoiding the intimacy that comes with interpersonal relationships. It's easy to unplug. It's easy to turn off the console. It's easy to jump to a different platform or world or game. And if somebody pisses you off on the interwebs, you say, well, screw it, I'm out of here. You don't ever actually have to reconcile any relationships. So it's interesting to me. I pulled up an article, where is it? Written in 2012. It's on the National Library of Medicine. Anybody can see this. And the title is literally Behavioral Addiction versus Substance Addiction, Correspondence of Psychiatric and Psychological Views. And written in 2012, published in 2012, April of 2012. And that's interesting to me because the DSM-5 came out in 2013. And the DSM-5 text revision, which is the blue one I'm holding in my hand, was published just a year ago, 2022. And they still have yet to incorporate some of these other process or behavioral addictions into the actual book. So I don't know what the foot dragging is about on this. We even have tobacco addiction in here, which is interesting. They say that, and they don't say nicotine. They say tobacco specifically, which is very bizarre to me because we've had smokeless, spitless tobacco since at least 2006 or something, when my brother was working for Philip Morris and Altria selling snus, and we never heard of that before. And now we have Zyn all over the country taking over college campuses. So it's not just tobacco anymore. And one would have to wonder if you carry our credentials and a person comes in saying, I really need to quit my nicotine pouches, we go, well, technically you don't qualify because it's not tobacco. like we got to update the language as a field, and we have to be more open with our ideas on what constitutes this stuff. So that being the foundation laid for this conversation, I'm curious what everybody's thoughts are, because we can see people getting addicted to lots of things, including politics and narratives and holding too tightly to their belief systems and worldviews, causing fights, and those will cause the same, like Eddie said, hold my beer type of response. When you're drunk at a bar, the reason that we have lots of fights and I love you, man, is because the alcohol numbs the prefrontal cortex, that frontal lobe part of your brain, and allows all the emotions to flow. You can get addicted to that too, especially if you've been bottling up a lot of emotions. And certainly, interacting online can create a lot of emotionality. So if you don't have a place to offload that, guess where you go? More online, right? So
One of the things that I forgot, excuse me, one of the things that I forgot to mention when I was speaking about is that I'm not quite sure if the process addictions cause this as well. So maybe Kevin or Jake, you guys can speak to this one. But I know with chemical addictions, not only does it like sort of hijack the brain when it comes to the various chemicals being released, it also starts cutting off the various communication pathways. So like that's why when people are on various substances, they act differently, act weird, act stupid, whatever you want to insert noun here. Essentially, they the brain does not communicate as well with different parts of the brain, and that's why, like, when it comes to getting off of various substances, it's so hard because the brain is now latched on that it just needs as a survival, and you're not thinking in a clear, logical point of manner. And to one thing that I wanted to speak on real quick, and I know I've been hijacking, so Brandon, Kevin hasn't been able to speak, but like where Jake was speaking about, the having the interactions in persons. And yes, this is the political statement, but we have all the kids that went through COVID. I work with a lot of them in schools now, and you can definitely, it's not in the DSM, and I'm not saying it should be in the DSM, but eventually we're going to have to figure out something like COVID kid syndrome. The kids that grew up in their primary ages, that were at home for 2 years and did not have that core interaction, you can tell the difference in how they act versus other kids that are older that did not go through that, because a lot of times they're more immature. They do not handle stress and fights as well because they did not have that ability, or they did not have to like work through these poor problems that elementary school is good for. Like a schoolyard fight, yeah, so kids fight in the schoolyard, no, but you know what it does teach them? It teaches them that maybe I shouldn't call little Timmy stupid because Timmy's going to punch me in the face. So it teaches them these like kind of core interactions, whereas these kids didn't get that because say someone makes fun of your mother on the Call of Duty server, well, you shoot them, teabag them, and you move on with life, kind of thing. It's they did not have to deal with stuff like in the real world. That's why also like internet trolls exist, because people are these keyboard warriors, but in real world they would not do this because they know that they would be called out on it, or face the consequences of their actions.
yeah, and I'll put one little cherry on top of that. That was nicely laid out. I'm worried that with the emergence of this neurotypical neurodivergent language, which kind of makes me throw up in my mouth a little bit just because the definitions are undefined, we're going to get people hiding behind that language as though it's part of their core brain structure, and there's nothing to be done about it. And I push back very, very hard on people who take that line of like, nope, it's just me, it's just how I'm wired. It's like, well, then I guess my profession needs to cease existing then, because you can never change. And it ends up becoming an excuse for bad behavior. They're like, nope, I'm just neurodivergent, that's who I am. Okay, well, I guess you're consequence free then. I'm not sure how to interpret that. And that worries me. So beware of when people start hiding behind language of permanence. as an excuse to explain away their poor social interactions or their maladaptive behaviors. Brandon or Kevin, do you guys want to chime in here?
Yeah, I can jump in. I just wanted to speak just to the prevalence of like the process addiction. I have several kids, and it's interesting to see that it's almost like, hanging out outside, like going fishing, like going shooting with your parents. It's like that stuff seems to just be like almost abnormal these days, at least like what I'm seeing, because I'll have a lot of kids, I'll be doing intakes and we'll be talking about like, what are some of your hobbies? Almost always it's some sort of electronics, some sort of video games, even things like I'll ask, like, there's a part of our intake process where we ask about spirituality, and I'll say like, are you religious or spiritual? And they'll just kind of look at me like with deer in headlights and not know what I'm talking about. And they're just so, enmeshed in the technology, and it's to the point to where there's a lot of parents, and, I'm not a parent at this point, but it's like, I would be thinking, I would want to do something to kind of break that a little bit. Like, what can I do to like get them outside? What can I do to get them out with, kids, and, kind of like what Jake was saying, develop those interpersonal skills. But I've got a couple of kids that it's like, they're like that. Their parents are like that. They're trying to get them to play outside. They limit their phone time. They limit their screen time. They're doing all these right things. But it's like these kids feel like outcasts because they don't have anyone to play with that wants to play with them outside. So I just wanted to speak, just to mention that, just to speak to the prevalence of like that process addiction, especially in children, and how big it really is.
We haven't spent any time really at all on this podcast discussing the work of Jonathan Haidt, but we probably should dedicate at least one episode to it. He and some colleagues have an organization called letgrow.org. And if you want to find out more, go to that website, LETGROW, letgrow.org. And to your point about that, when I talk about get your kids off the phones, get them off social media specifically, the parents will say, well, everybody else is on them. I said, find some other like-minded parents and make sure that your kids all hang together. Because that's the only way we're going to be able to push back. We can't just throw our hands in the air and go, everybody else is doing it, so I guess my kids should too, even though you know that it's gnawing at you inside that you're doing the wrong thing. That's how we push back. You have to find some like-minded parents who are going to do the same thing, because otherwise we are going to set our kids up for failure.
I had a question on like process addiction. You mentioned softball. Softball's not something that comes even on my radar when I think of things.
Right.
Casinos, social media, video games now are designed to be addictive and have their users keep coming back, but softball isn't. Is that something you guys as mental health professionals would approach differently if someone came with social media, casino, something like that, versus maybe softball that's more community oriented and maybe rooted in something else?
So it's not by design, right? And the reason I use softball is because it's kind of cheeky and fun, and it's that anecdotal outlier that proves the point. I would never advise anybody not to engage in physical activity in a recreational league. It just so happens that we also can't overlook that and just be like, oh, he's having a lot of fun. It's like, yeah, at the expense of his family. Eddie, you were going to jump in though.
Yeah, I was gonna speak to. It's kind of weird. I mean, that I knew Jake. He always does like the tongue-in-cheek model on that, because when it comes to like addictions and stuff like that, a lot of times we push to get them involved in healthy community style skills, and it is true. Like a lot of times when people are doing these like various drugs, or they've like burnt out their dopamine systems, they have to find something that kind of gives them that rush, which is why you see a lot of people turn to extreme sports, mountain biking, climbing, stuff like that, to try to get that rush that they were going to get when they were doing like various substances. Also why like working out is big, because it releases all those same chemicals, and it kind of gives that like push through the body and exhaust the body. But when it comes to like that specific stuff, I mean, people can get addicted to anything. I let me So granted, this is Lorcana cards and not like Magic the Gathering. That's what I grew up playing. And like I know 100% you can get addicted to those games, because it's almost like that, again, gambling, collecting field. People overspend on it because it's that you get other interactions in it, but like you're like that, I need to get better, I need to do more, so they just overspend and stuff like that. Firearms can be the same way. People can overspend and stuff and not realize what they're doing, because it's just this process, like it brings me this momentary amount of joy. So kind of anything. I know, Brandon, you deal a lot with individuals who have worked with trauma. What is some stuff that you see, like when people are going through the various traumas? I know what I've seen, but I'm curious what your thoughts.
Sure, like in terms of like trauma and addiction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, I'd say, you know, a lot of times, I mean, like when you're, especially like with, I see it more with chemical addictions, but I mean, when you go through chemical addictions, you know, kind of like you were saying with the example of the lady and her kids, you know, like people get so wrapped up and people get so like they really it's like a physical need to, you know, have that substance, and it's to the point to where it's no longer something that they need to feel pleasurable. It's something that they need to feel normal. And a lot of times, you know, like when they're blowing all their money on stuff like that, you know, they have to, you know, resort to really horrific things to get those substances that they need. And, you know, because of that, there comes a lot of trauma. So I'd say there's a definite correlation there.
You bring up a good point about baseline. When we move our baseline, it's really hard to change. And we can talk in terms of, like just strict behaviorism, where you're reinforcing a behavior or extinguishing a behavior. The more you get a behavior reinforced, the more likely that behavior is to be repeated by the individual who's doing it. And what drugs do and what behavioral patterning does is that it reinforces the behavior. Now, we could go neurological, and like Eddie's talked about a bunch of different chemicals. There's epinephrine and norepinephrine, which are basically adrenaline and noradrenaline, serotonin, dopamine, cortisol. There's a whole bunch of hormones and neurochemicals that do certain things. And I talk a little bit about this in the emotional functioning working, podcast presentation, whenever I teach this stuff. And the idea is that these chemicals are designed to tell the brain to take action in some way, shape, or form. Some of it is pleasurable, some of it is aversive. So we want to avoid things that scare us. We want to engage in things that thrill us, that kind of thing. So what ends up happening is, let's take a stimulant, for example. We start with the gateway drug of caffeine, right? And kids start on caffeine. My 8-year-old drinks coffee at church. He loads it up with cream, but you know, he's still drinking coffee and he likes the taste and it, whatever. He likes feeling like an adult. Now, if we let him go long enough, or we don't monitor that, it could end up impacting his brain in a way that leads him to take a next step to something more potent, say an energy drink with, instead of, there's 75 to 80 milligrams caffeine in a standard cup of church coffee. Now we're looking at 150 to 200 milligrams in a Red Bull or something, or 300 milligrams in a Bang. And then you got taurine and whatever all the other chemicals are that stimulate you in those energy drinks. And then from the energy drink, we go to something else a little stronger. Maybe you're combining substances. Maybe you jump to nicotine and caffeine at the same time. And then it's like, well, what's next? Cocaine, meth, and then what type of administration? And we haven't talked about routes of administration yet. A route of administration is how you intake the chemical. So eating is the slowest absorption that we can have. Snorting and inhaling are the next two fastest. And then the fastest of all is injection. So commonly called slamming on the street. So if you're slamming methamphetamine, you are really addicted and your baseline has been pushed so high. Now, I'm not talking about Elijah, slamming meth by the time he's 16 years old. God forbid. But I do know kids who have gone that route. They're into injectable drugs in their teenage years, and it's really, really frightening. Now, we have lots of reasons to explain that, and they vary by the individual. Some of it is broken home, experimentation, chasing a high. But the point is, they still need it. The brain still craves that stuff. And to get back off of that baseline and return it to what would approximate normal, you have to take some time away from the substance. We would call that a detoxification in most cases. And the detox symptoms are often so much more unpleasant than the chase of the drug that eventually you end up just doing the drugs to avoid the detox. It's really, really bad. And this is especially true with opioids, because coming off of heroin, you feel like you're going to die. You're not, but you feel like you are. So it's just easier to stay at that default state of high all the time, even if it's a low kind of high and you're not necessarily like flying on the clouds. Now, there are some drugs where if you detox improperly, you will die. Alcohol is one of those, and alcohol is ridiculously popular. If you drink hard enough, long enough, you will get to a point where if you stop drinking, your body will shut down. So it's important, if you're detoxing off alcohol, counterintuitive though it may be, you want to take little sips of alcohol over an extended period of time to titrate down off of that. It's also wise to think about this in terms of the quote unquote legal stuff that we get prescribed by, say, psychiatrists or nurse practitioners or whatnot. If you're on any drug for a long period of time, your body gets used to it. And we're talking neuroscience here, but it can be for your liver, your kidneys, your heart medicine, any of that stuff. If you stop it cold turkey, your body's going to go into some sort of arrested shock response because it doesn't know what to do without that constant infusion. And this is even true for things like meat and milk. If you go long periods of time without having milk and you drink some milk, your gut's not going to know what to do with it. And you're going to get some upset stomach and probably some bowel issues. So keep in mind that as you continue down a behavioral pattern, stepping away from the behavior, even if that behavior is a consumption of something, does require the patience, the insight, the diligence, the wherewithal, the accountability, the support systems, and possibly other medicines and substances to move away from it. And to finalize this, if you were listening at the beginning, I said, I'm taking a step back from a lot of the volunteer activities I've been doing lately. For me, I've been going in 12th gear like every day of the week for like 2 decades. And it was proving to be unsustainable. And part of that was an erosion, the unintended consequence was an erosion of my relationships with my own family. And I just need to be present for my kids. So I've resigned from a lot of boards and committees. I've stepped back from this particular podcast even. I'm still coaching my kids in baseball. I still sit on a couple of different committees and boards, but it is nowhere near what it was, 2 to 5 years ago. And let me tell you how hard that is. It is very, very hard to stare at a mostly empty calendar and wonder how I'm going to fill my time productively and not substitute with yet another drug or behavior pattern that I'm going to fall into by default, as opposed to intentionality. So it doesn't matter how this presents. And as one of the people who's telling the listening audience how hard this is, believe me, I know, because I became essentially what is addicted to a pattern of community involvement and work involvement. And I was overcommitted and it was taking a toll on me. So it's hard. It's really hard. I think I committed to this like July of 23. We're now recording this in April of 24. I'm still not hitting what I think my baseline needs to be. So it does take some time, and you want to have some patience and grace with yourself and certainly with the other people who are going through this. Long-winded answer to a short question.
What's kind of the neurological chemical process of some of those things that are designed to be addictive, but people deny that they're addictive? We think of social media. I mean, casinos are an easy one because everybody kind of accepts gambling as an addiction, but social media, video games, what's happening in the brain that makes those things so addictive and where people are so resistant of it?
Eddie, you want to take that? I mean, I got some thoughts. I don't know if they're cogent.
So my dog's gonna be barking in the background. Apologies, guys. So
you're like on a DMX track. It's okay.
Yeah, it's fine. For those curious, I live in the country and I live in the mountains, and I'm pretty sure there's turkeys walking through my yard right now. So a couple
of turkeys on your screen right now.
There, give me a second. Jake, can you just give your part of the answer? I got to get this dog to start barking.
Yeah, sure. As I take a bite of apple. So for the record, I couldn't hear the dogs, but maybe other people can. My response is manifold. I can't help but look at this from a systemic perspective and also from a behaviors perspective and a Jungian analytic psychological perspective. So let's go systems first. Systemically, we're not individuals walking the earth by ourselves. There's no man is an island. We're all interconnected with various things. And those things are in systems also. So you got your family system, your work system, your extracurricular hobby system. And then you've got all the stuff behind that brought you to the moment that you're in. So it could be former work, former family, former relationships. So we're all integrated into the community in various systems of overlap. Those systems, and this is where I slide into the Jungian perspective, those systems will impart knowledge into our our psyches, into our minds, that creates our worldview. And our worldview tells us certain things by default. The shortcut to working through life is that we assess things and we conclude things without having to ask a series of questions that are really, really involved, because it's inefficient. And what that ends up becoming is something approximating an ego state, whereby I'm living my life based on all the information I've acquired to date through all the systems that I've ever interfaced with, including the current ones, that says, this is how I do things. And I'm usually full of shoulds in that. Like, I should do this, he should do that, I ought to, I must, I need to. So one of those parts that comprises what I do is my behavior pattern, my addiction pattern, if you will. And if that is so well ingrained over a long period of time that I can't separate what I do from who I am, to question the thing that I do is tantamount to challenging who I am as a human being. Now, I know that's not true. You guys know that's not true. Who you are is created by God to walk the earth and do your thing. Is very separate from the things you do on the outside. So the clothes you wear, the car you drive, the job you work, there may be some overlap with personal character, but it's not who you are. Separate and apart from those things, if all those disappeared, who you are should be largely unaffected. You can still pick up and do different things. But for the people who have conflated who they are with what they do or what they think, simply coming along and saying, hey, I think you're addicted to your phone, may come off neurologically as an attack on self. Then you get a very limbic response, meaning you get a fear-based response because it's like they're under attack. And then you get defensiveness, and then you get an argument. And sometimes that argument can come out in the form of, no, it isn't. This is not an addiction. I can quit anytime I want. Or the phone is not an addiction, or the video games are not an addiction. And then they make an appeal to authority as I reach for my DSM here. And they say, it's not in the book, therefore it's not an addiction. Medicine doesn't, the medical community says it's not an addiction, therefore it must not be addiction. Don't call me an addict. I can go back to my fill in the blank bad behavior pattern and I'm fine. That makes sense?
Yeah, and maybe this will help a little bit, Eddie. My experience is I worked in casinos from 18 to 23, so I designed the promotions that were addictive, and then obviously work in social media. But in casinos, we were always looking for ways to bring people on property. So a free play offer to get them on property to start that behavior that we wanted, and then trying to reward them for continuing that behavior by having promotions. And we even had one that had a percentage of, oh, you reached this amount of coin in's just the amount of money going into a device. Can you reach this level to get more rewards? So that's how those were designed. And in the last couple of years, we were looking at the video game industry because they were kind of at the forefront of those kind of new ways to do it. We see it in Call of Duty of get 5 kills with a rifle and you unlock things. So it's bringing people on for a purpose that keeps them on, and even, hey, log on today and you'll earn progress to get a better reward. So Eddie, how do you think those designs relate maybe chemically and the dopamine to the substances that you were talking about earlier?
I think they play on the same stuff, because I know you didn't mention it, but like the microtransactions that games do, they're designed to prey on people. Like, hey, are you struggling doing this thing? You can either watch this ad or you can spend 99 cents and then jump 50 levels or whatever. And it's sad that you see a lot of those transactions in games designed for kids. So it's a lot of like very targeted behavior. I mentioned Magic the Gathering earlier. If someone's ever heard of that, they have an online game component called MTG Arena, and they have the same thing. It is all a bunch of microtransactions designed, to prey on the people who don't really know any better. So they're basically making money off the people who are addicted to this process. But what you're speaking to as like, you need to reach this next level, it's during this time you're experiencing different things. You're experiencing the anxiety of, okay, what if I don't win? Or you're experiencing the highs, oh my god, I just hit this big win. And especially on like slot machines, all these lights go off, sounds goes off, And then if you're playing table games, I mean, Brandon actually saw this in Vegas where, I lost $150 in the span of probably 20 minutes because it wasn't my thing is, man, I know how to play blackjack. Well, apparently I don't know how to play 2-deck blackjack that well. But I mean, the whole thing is, I can keep doing this, keep reaching in my wall, and eventually I go, like, what am I doing? Just stop and go to bed. Like, so what it was is I was chasing that, like, I need to do better. I can do this better. I can win. I can reach this high because, 3 years ago I was in Vegas and I walked home with, $5,000. I can do this again, kind of thing. So like it kind of preys on that, like, rover thing. Now, luckily for me in that specific situation, one, I didn't walk in with that much money, and two, I wasn't. I realized in a second, like, I should just go to bed. It's 3 a.m. But again, like with specifically with casinos, they pump oxygen in the room. The lights are always there and dim. You can't be checking your phone at the tables. It's all designed to keep you in the room and playing and giving money, and it just plays on the chemicals of your brain going of the high of like, I can win. When, like, I may have already lost $50, but like I just hit this jackpot or whatever, or mini jackpot, and I get like 20, and I can keep doing this. I can keep rolling over, and it's all designed to do it. And the drugs do the same thing to just different degrees. But I mean, that's how social media works. That's how all these game engagements work. They know what hijacks the brain and what gets people in, and they have a very targeted audience. And while they would like to bring everyone in, they know the people that gives them the most money are the ones that are the most successful to this. Same thing with, like, addictions. One thing I haven't spoken on that I think is worth speaking about now is that while there is not a actual physical link between having a parent who is addicted to substances and yourself becoming addicted to substances, there is no saying like, say Jake's my dad, okay, and this obviously isn't true, but say Jake has a cocaine addiction. Let's say, like, so Jake has a cocaine addiction or whatever, and I was raised around him. I'm not saying I'm going to become addicted to cocaine, but there is a good chance because of all the stuff that I grew up around that could happen. I can speak specifically about my family real quick. Alcoholism was rampant in my family. My great grandfather committed suicide while he was drunk. My grandfather was an alcoholic, and then he stopped drinking, but unfortunately not before my dad started. My dad basically went cold turkey and cut it off when I was born because my mom gave him an ultimatum, and he chose the route of the family versus the bottle, which is incredibly hard for people to do, for the record. So the amount of like willpower my dad displayed in that moment to do that is astronomical. I cannot explain with someone who is addicted to a substance to be able to go, no, I'm choosing my family. That is incredibly hard willpower to keep up, especially for all these years. And I've seen him touch it maybe a few times, and I'm not sure if he was truly addicted, because when he has touched it, he didn't go back on. But I think he did kind of what I done when I hit the low points in my life. I turned to the bottle and I just could not get off, so I kind of got slapped up by the head. All this is to say is that while having a parent who is addicted to something doesn't make you automatically in, but it makes you more successful due to the behaviors that you grew up in and around.
Yeah, I have a personal testimony to that. I smoked cigarettes for several years. I ended up quitting about 6 or 7 years ago. I lost count now. But my entire family smoked growing up, and they always told me, don't smoke cigarettes as they're smoking. I remember specifically, like, there was one member of my family, like, they were smoking a cigarette, and I was kind of like just kind of watching them, and they looked at me and said, like, hey, don't ever do this. And, I'm kind of thinking, like, okay, everybody's telling me not to do this, but everybody's doing this, so I kind of want to do this. So, as a kid, I would like sneak out at night when parents were in bed, and, I would start, man, it's gross, but I was a kid, I would like, smoke the cigarette butts that were in the ashtray. And then eventually that led to, like people getting cigarettes in school. And then I would like, be buying cigarettes from them. And then before, 8th grade, I was like addicted to nicotine. So yeah, definitely, just to add on to that, Eddie, I can definitely relate to that.
Go ahead. Oh, I thought I saw you breathe in there. Kevin and I were chatting the other day, and I posted something on Twitter because yet again, a Jonathan Haidt article came through, and he has 4 suggestions on how to combat what's going on in teen mental illness with social media. And one is no smartphones before high school, as a norm, not as a law. No social media before 16. phone-free schools, which I'm very proud that my kids' school is doing this at my suggestion because of Heights research. They put their phones in what are called yonder pouches, that basically magnetic lockdowns that they go throughout the day and they don't have their phone. And it's been very successful. There was some pushback in the beginning, but it's worked. The parents like it and the kids like it, actually. They notice the difference. And then the fourth one is more independence, free play, and responsibility in the real world, which we've discussed. And when Kevin and I were talking about this, he says, well, it starts with the adults. You can't say, do as I say, not as I do. And if this were any other public health issue, like, uh, cigarette smoking, I changed it to something else when I posted. I said cocaine. Um, we wouldn't tolerate the adults doing it on movie screens or in public. So I just wrote, this starts with the adults. If we had a childhood epidemic of a different sort, say cocaine, we wouldn't allow movie stars or parents to be broadcasting its consumption. But because adults are all addicted to their devices, the children follow suit. And Brandon makes a great point there about how we we sit there and go, don't get on your phone as I'm hammer texting, or doom scrolling or whatever I'm doing. So we absolutely have to have consistency when we're communicating this message. I want to go back to something too that Eddie was alluding to with the microtransactions, right? I've been long on this rant for years now about how instant gratification culture has completely eroded our distress tolerance. And I don't know when it started. It may have started with, microwave TV dinners in the 70s or something. But slowly but surely, and more rapidly recently, we have lost all ability to commit, be grateful, have delayed gratification, look downfield, invest in the future. Like, everything but instant gratification. We've lost it all. And that is yet another way that I think that we're seeing this emerge, where we don't have any tolerance for things that take time or accumulation or patience. When you can just buy your way out for 99 cents of having to shoot through the level appropriately, or more expensive than 99 cents in some cases, you can, and Kevin will talk about this in a minute because we talked about this on Noggin Notes, even sports games, you can't build up your roster anymore. You just purchase your roster, right? I think that's absolutely feeding a different type of addiction that we aren't acknowledging, which is instant gratification. Amazon delivers everything. You don't even have to leave your house. I don't even have to shop for groceries anymore. They'll deliver it to me in my car. I don't even have to go to the store. If I go through Instacart, they'll deliver it to my house, right? Like, I don't have to do anything. And I think our society is way worse off for it because we don't have to commit. It's really, really bad. And that's a completely different behavioral process addiction that nobody's talking about. We talk about the stuff that we can see. It's like, oh, you're addicted to this pattern of behavior. Well, what if the pattern of behavior is the very instant gratification that's crushing our ability to have patience and therefore gratitude, because nothing is earned. It's all just granted.
It's just amazing. There's no kind of guardrails around, especially like the video game industry. I just looked it up. They made $4.3 million or $1 billion last year in microtransaction. That's a ton of money. And for those of you that might not know what microtransactions are, I explained it to Jake this way. All the sports games have them. They have, like, you can play your normal season as a team you like or play against your friends, but they have an online platform where you get packs, almost like Pokemon or baseball card packs when you were growing up, but then you get to only use the players that you get in packs with. And you can buy really good players for like 20, 40, $60, and you need a good team to be able to compete online and have fun. So it's crazy. They even show the percentages, and some of it, once you've been playing a little while, it's the exact same odds as gambling. At the casinos, the hold, what the casino held from all the coin in, was anywhere between 3 to 6%. And you look at the packs, because I think legally they now have to show their percentage of probabilities of what type of player you can get when buying that $1, $2, $10 pack. And it's like 1% chance that you're going to get a card that's going to be useful for you. And they use, kind of like Eddie was talking about, the lights and sounds. When you buy a pack, it's all this kind of reveal kind of psychology, just like the slot machine of the spinning. And then you see a player come out, as a special. It will even be like, oh, this is NBA. They kind of have like rankings of gold, platinum, different ones. So it'll be like, oh, you're going to get a silver or a diamond player. So you're excited to see who it is. And then, oh, I already have that player. That one's not useful. It's just crazy to see that we're allowing the same designs allowed in gaming that are restricted by age open to kids of all ages.
Well, this is why we do this, right? Is to bring information to people so they can have the awareness that Eddie had in that casino in Vegas to go, man, I do this for a living and I find myself getting sucked in. Time to stop, right? Like there's a reason casinos don't have clocks on the wall either or windows, and their patterns on the carpet are all a mishmash. Like there's a quote from Ocean's 11 where Danny Ocean says, casinos are built like labyrinths to keep people in. I need you guys to find the quickest way out. That's why, right? And now the games themselves are the labyrinths to keep us in. It's like, how do I get out of this? All right, well, no, you just stay in. And there's lots of really good information about this topic, as well as the broader mechanisms behind the scenes through the Center for Humane Technology. If you go to humanetech.org and listen to their podcast called oh geez, it just escaped my mind. They're the ones who made the Social Dilemma, though, the documentary. They pulled all that from their podcast. And it's escaping me. It'll come to my mind here shortly. But humanetech.org talks about solutions to this, not just belly aching and bemoaning. And I think the reason we want to do this, we want to bring this type of awareness to people so that when they're in their video games, in their whatever their process addictions are, even their chemical addictions, they can go, I got to stop. This is not good. Look around, survey, just like I did with my own life. Go, what am I doing? I'm throwing all this time and talent and resources at organizations, and is this benefiting my family? My family should come first. Like, that's great that I'm on the licensing board and I'm helping a school and I'm doing all this other stuff in the community, but where's the output? Am I just chasing something for my own ego? For my own, what am I avoiding, right? Am I avoiding my own intimacy? If I teach intimacy for a living, I better be doing it in my own life. Otherwise, I'm pretty inconsistent and probably pretty inauthentic. So maybe with this podcast, people can look at themselves in the mirror, scary though that may be, probably need to make some adjustments.
So I have a question about, just how you guys treat these different addictions, because we talked about there's a lot of parallels between substance and plus addictions. So, kind of when I think about like treatment, I think about, what are the voids that we're trying to fill? What are the triggers? Teaching like urge surfing, how, kind of to quote Christian Conti, have a drink. There's like those urges. So every urge or addiction has a beginning, middle, and an end. So that's kind of like, how I go with the substance use addiction. So being that there's all these parallels between the two, do you guys find that treating them is the same?
So treatment modalities differ depending on the clinician. Some people, like when it comes to pure substance use, everyone knows about what you should know about AA and NA, so Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous. So those are like 12-step programs that preach complete abstinence. And in some people, that is what they need. If they return to the substance whatsoever, if they return to the substance whatsoever, their life will be in shambles. They can't operate whatsoever within their system. I operate in what's called a harm reduction model, meaning that I can admit that some people are not ready for pure abstinence. And abstinence, if you aren't familiar with the term, just means not doing it whatsoever, or not involving the act. And so now, obviously, the ultimate harm reduction would be to not touch whatever substance you're on. But some people are not ready to be there. And so for me, I work with individuals to find, okay, what is the safest route you're going to use? It may not be the most popular program in some areas, but like the needle exchange program is kind of that idea. I'm not necessarily advocating for that program, just saying, but that's the idea behind it. We're going to reduce the overall amount of harm it can do to the person and the community. But like specifically for like my clients, like one of the first things I usually do is like I look at, okay, if they're going to school, how can we reduce the harm of them not getting high, say, in school, and we make it so they only do it after school, or we reduce instead of instead of like, mixing various substances, we stick to one substance at a time. And so I try to find the model, or excuse me, I try to find the strategy that they're willing to do, they're willing to buy in to. The idea is the stages of change. Are they ready for where are they at in the stage of change? And I will meet them at that stage and then try to help push them to the next stage. Because ultimately, when it comes to addictions, while your brain, in a sense, is hijacked, as it is, that is the person that has to do the work. You cannot push someone and make them do something. They will do it. They will do it to where they're at. And so you just try to, for me, I try to show them, okay, where, like specifically when it comes to substance, I try to find things with them. Okay, what can you do that brings joy that is not a substance? And we do that involving various things. I don't really work too much in the other addiction realm, and most of that is just not because I don't know how to. It's just my agency that I work with, we are contracted to work with this population. So I specifically work with this population. And so that's where I've gotten kind of good at that population. Jake works in the overall, where his agency, I think, works with everyone. So he may be able to speak better to the models he uses to work with people who aren't just on chemical addictions.
I want to hear Brandon's answer after I'm done here too, because you're the one who asked the question and you do have a license. Couple things, depending on who I'm working with and what their comfort level is with the type of angle I will use, I'll use various ones. So for those of you who don't know, I've basically integrated a handful of different modalities, as we would call them, which is an approach to therapy. William Glasser's choice theory is one, or reality therapy. Carl Jung, analytic psychology, is one. DBT is another one. There's a lot of really good stuff in DBT, and from DBT, you get a lot of other behavioral therapy stuff. So CBT, REBT, emotional functioning for sure, and then attachment theory, family systems type stuff. So I can pull from any of those things when I'm talking to somebody about anything really. And so I'll try to meet them where they are with language that works. But I almost always view them through the lens of behavioral patterning, introjected, meaning the unquestioned beliefs or assumptions that the world has given them over time. So introjected views, worldviews, how they see themselves, how they see the other people. And then vulnerability through emotional functioning. What are they avoiding, in other words? So I'll try to work this stuff in. And I really, if the word addiction makes people uncomfortable, which it can, I would just say use something more neutral, like you have a pattern of behavior that's not working. That's it. You get a pattern of behavior that's not working. I don't have to use addiction if that sounds judgmental. Like, I'm addicted and therefore I've handed over control to this thing or this substance or whatever. Like, okay, well, let's take back control. And that's a language of choice theory. What do you want to choose differently? If they're not cool with that because they're like, you're saying I'm choosing this, I get combative with that. I could certainly help them understand that point of view. But if that's not working, I'm not going to take that approach and go, loggerheads with them and try to beat them into submission. So I'll say, well, no, it's just really not your fault. I mean, you were raised around addiction, you're raised around violence and chaos. It's all you ever know. Probably haven't tried anything new. It's not your fault. And they go, yeah, okay, well, thank you for saying that. It's not my fault. My parents really screwed me up. And I will punctuate it with something like, but it is your responsibility because they're not living your life. You are. Much to Eddie's point, I'm not living my patients' lives. They are. So it's not my job to change them. My job is to create an environment that's conducive to change. And I will throw different perspectives at them to see which one sticks. And then they'll go, all right, that choice thing really resonates with me, or, because I've always loved personal responsibility and all that stuff. Or maybe they say, yeah, I really like the worldview that like my psyche is infinite in its capacity. And I want to tap into some of that potential and stop living my life out of somebody else's ideas and viewpoints. And the behavioral stuff is really great too. Like there's a lot of skills associated with DBT, finding the dialectic, bringing the both and together, the urge surfing, as you talk about, accurate emotional expression. What are you feeling right now that you might want to feel later? What are you not feeling? What are you avoiding? And then I'll help educate them by saying, I think you're doing this thing out of a fear. And that fear is something you've never been taught is acceptable. So let's work a little bit more on what fear looks like, what its purpose is, if it's a rational or irrational fear. So a lot of education, a lot of different shuffling of worldviews, but with a high degree of intentionality to meet the individual where they are, as opposed to where I think they should be, or to try to cram them into my tiny little box of quantification, because that's not right either. I don't want to make it about me. That's why I tell people they should be integrated with the way that they see things too. So I don't know if that really answers the question. It was kind of a non-answer, but it depends. Brandon, how do you do it?
No, it did. Yeah. And I mean, that's what I'm saying. I know every clinician has their own approach to it. That's why I was just curious, like, what you guys were doing, especially Eddie, since you're, like specialized in this field, despite what the substance is. But I think what I do, kind of like Jake, I'm a really big user of choice theory. So what I really focus on is I kind of start thinking, like the WDEP. That's like, what do they want? What are they doing to get what they want? E is for evaluation, P is for planning. So how are we going to get them to what they want? In order to do that, we have to identify what stage of change they're in. Kind of like what Eddie was saying, it's getting them into that next stage of change, really identifying, like how much they want it, identifying what's the reason they're using or what's the reason they're, engaging in this activity. And, stressing the point that it's not, it's like, yes, I totally agree. Everybody always has a choice. That's like the biggest component of choice theory. But sometimes it's not a great choice. It's like a double-edged sword. So kind of like think about, substance use mentality. So that's a really difficult decision for a lot of people to get clean because, is it easier to continue using the drugs and just keep doing what I'm doing? Or do I go to detox, spend 3 days there, get into an outpatient program, get on disability or get a job, get my life back together, because it could take a really long time to, get your life back together when you're going through an addiction. So it's essentially, kind of to recap, just highlighting the level of choice. Again, the WDEP, the stages of change, the urge surfing, just teaching the education that, every urge has a beginning, middle, and an end. That's like kind of further down the road. And then just being able to identify the triggers. I think that's really huge. Like, what are the triggers that are getting you to engage in this activity or to use the substance? What can we do to avoid them? What can we do to limit them if they're unavoidable? And if you do come in contact with them, how can you cope with them?
I want to go ahead, Eddie. Nope.
The biggest thing I think, like both of everyone was saying, I put it in the chat, but like pattern recognition is like that's what we do as humans. But all these keys, pattern recognition is the main thing that all therapists, if you're listening to this and you're a therapist and you're wanting to learn more, that is the key when working with various addictions. And if you're a person yourself, like who may be struggling with something and you're not ready for professional help, or maybe you feel like you don't need it. I'm not saying you do or you do not, but you're recognizing the pattern of when I use, why I use, and then how does it affect me. And what Brandon was speaking about of urge surfing and all the other things that he spoke about, those play into it. But with any of these things with addictions, a pattern has started over time, and you are increasing the negative part of the pattern while decreasing the positive parts of the aspects that can get you out of the pattern.
Well, it's about recognition, right? And I gave a long-winded answer as to how I treat this stuff, but ultimately, I think I default to emotions. I look and see how tolerant are you of your emotions. And when we're looking at awareness, you have to be aware that there's a pattern in the first place. And if you're not aware, it's probably my job to help make you aware. And if you're not good at tolerating emotions, some of those emotions might be fear of looking at oneself, fear of letting go of the pattern, shame and guilt that you're even in it because you've wreaked destruction across many different interfaces. And then I have to help teach you that those are tolerable things also, right? And we breezed over stages of change. I want to go through that real quick. There's essentially five stages of change, and they come from, I just lost those authors too. Your Undivided Attention is the podcast, by the way, from the Center for Humane Technology. Your Undivided Attention, if you want to listen to that. But the five stages of change are in order from least awareness to most awareness. Are pre-contemplation, when you don't know that you have a need to make change. Contemplation, when you're starting to think about maybe making change. Preparation, which is exactly what it sounds like. You're preparing to make change. action, where you've decided to make change and you're making it, and then maintenance, you have made the change. Now, along the way, at any one of those stages of change, you can have something called relapse, where you slide back 1 or 2 stages or all the way back to the beginning. But the idea is that you progress through those stages, and people can be anywhere along them. So, like, you can be talking to your spouse for years on end about, like, I should probably reduce my drinking. I should probably think about quitting drinking, right? You're contemplative, pre-contemplative, and some might put a one below that called denial, when you're fully actively denying that there's a problem. Pre-contemplative is you're just not even aware that it's an issue. And a lot of people come in pre-contemplatively, but they're in the office for a different reason. They state that, yeah, I'm having marriage difficulties and I really want to fix my marriage. And maybe the clinician, after doing their robust biopsychosocial interview, says, I wonder if this pattern of behavior over in this area isn't your problem. Maybe it's not your marriage per se, but it's the late nights, the gambling, the drinking, the constant video games, and behind that is an avoidance of something else, intimacy perhaps, which then speaks to emotional functioning, right? So I always tend to default to emotional functioning. But one of the biggest emotional drivers, I think, in a lot of these addictions is the shame. So many people, you ask Brandon about his trauma stuff, that the work that he does, so many people walking the planet have so much shame about stuff that they've done or that's been done to them, that has removed their voice. They no longer believe they have agency. They don't believe they have worth. Or if they do, it's not as much as it could be. And out of that sense of shame, out of that sense of worthlessness, or out of that sense of despair, which is more on the sadness continuum, but if you have so much shame that you've given up and now you become sad, which looks like depression, you can start dabbling in things that take you out of that, even momentarily. Everything from alcohol to hallucinogens, everything from stimulants to depressants, including video games. If I can dive into an alternate reality that helps me avoid my own actual reality, that's always reminding me that I'm a worthless, no good so-and-so, then I'm going to do it. And over time, that pattern builds up to something that looks like an addiction. They come into the office, they go, I got this addiction. And we go, yeah, you got an addiction. And we start treating the addiction with all the typical things, but we forget that what's underlying it is a trauma history, a shame function, lack of sense of self-worth, no self-efficacy. And that's really the problem. The problem is not the outward facing behaviors. They look like problems. We call them problems, but really those are symptomatic of the deeper issue, which is the individual doesn't know who they are, doesn't know where they're going in life, is disconnected from reality, doesn't know how to get back in. They don't have a spiritual worldview. They don't have any anchoring principles, like lots and lots of things that don't have diagnostic codes attached to them that we can send off to insurance. But that absolutely is what we need to be addressing. And in my experience, when you address the underlying problem, the symptoms just disappear, which is great. And then you're not playing therapeutic whack-a-mole chasing symptoms all over the place. It can get somebody to stop drinking. I don't know how many people we know who've quit, a substance like alcohol and just immediately turned to cigarettes and coffee. Like every AA meeting, what's there? Smoking outside and coffee on the inside. So are you replacing the addiction with something less detrimental? Probably, maybe. I don't know. There's a lot of research on smoking that says it causes cancer. So you gave up the, beating up the liver with the alcohol, but now you're sucking poison into your lungs. I don't know that that's better, but it's certainly more socially acceptable. And I think we need to have that conversation too. That's the harm reduction method. Hey, we reduced your harm. We didn't get rid of it. We didn't replace it with something healthy, but we reduced it, right? And we can all feel good about that. So I'm with Eddie on that. Like, harm reduction has its place, but it should be temporary. It should not be the solution. And a lot of cities, unfortunately, are saying, "Oh, this is the solution. Just live your life in existence, but not thriving. We'll give you free needles."
Yeah, and the
I don't
board
want to
and
go down
stuff
that
like
track.
the boards and stuff are pushing the harm reduction model, which I'll say this. I think the harm reduction model is a very good baseline starter model. But what a lot of people, clinicians involved, like the professionals in the board, they forget the ultimate harm reduction is removing the catalyst of that harm to begin with. And so
Absolutely.
that's what they need to focus on.
Absolutely. Well, probably a good place to stop, huh? You got an hour and 15 or something like that. Kevin, did you want to tie anything more in? Because you have a wealth of knowledge about this. And maybe there's something to ice the cake here before we sign off.
For me, I go as far as a minor in psychology, but not as equipped with all the knowledge and stuff you guys have. But I just like to take breaks. On the weekends, I'll try to just put my phone, leave it on the nightstand and charger, to get away from it, and almost have, you guys talked about a detox with alcohol and different stuff like that, but almost a little detox of the phone. And I'll even find myself being like, oh, let me go check this, and then I'm like, why? I have no need. It's not water or food. I don't need it to live. I'm with my family. I have no need. But that just shows, oh, there's that subconscious thing. Go check this. Go do this. So that's often a great thing I'll advise. Or with social media, delete your apps for period of time and see where you're at. I know, Jake, you've taken part of that, of taking a little detox for a month, and that's a great way to maybe become aware of things that you weren't aware of and how much they were impacting you.
We can certainly get into a pattern of telling ourselves that we need the thing or the thing needs us too, in order to justify the continued participation. And reality says that's not true at all. And if you don't need to look any further than our interview with Jose Fierro, who's a Walk the Talk board member on this very podcast, who has zero social media. He's a grown man in his late 40s, like none. It hasn't affected him one bit. He's not missing out without Instagram or Facebook or Twitter. He's living a great life. He's present with his family. He doesn't need it. So if a man like that can do it, then probably the rest of us can do it too. I don't think we need it. The world's not going to collapse if we all just pull the plug on social media. Prochaska and DiClementi, by the way, Prochaska and DiClementi are the Stages of Change authors. I meant to say that. I like to give attribution where I can. So, well said. I hope this was useful for people. I guess my takeaway is that it's always nice to revisit these things and remind ourselves that they are so nuanced and there's so many dynamics that go into it. It's not just as easy as saying, quit the substance or stop attending that thing. We have to look deep into the causalities, and they are usually multiple causalities when we get to some maladaptive behavior that rises to the level of life interference, right? And I think my recognition of that was when Brandon said, how do you guys deal with this with your patients? And I go, long-winded answer with a bunch of things. There is no one size fits all. So that's my takeaway. Eddie, what's your takeaway?
The just continued that we need to keep increasing our knowledge. I know when we first talked about this, my first question was, what is because I understood chemical addiction, but what is process addiction? And then once it started being explained, it was like, oh, okay, I understand that because it's the same model. But just you need to continue to learn, continue to grow, and just every perspective is key. There's 3 clinicians here, and all 3 of us approach things in slightly different ways. And it's not because one of our methods is better than the others, because we each deal with different clients, and you have to meet the human where they're at, like we've all stated. So that's my key takeaway is just, be aware of your own limitations in your own therapy and be willing to grow.
B?
Yeah, I think just to kind of mirror Eddie, just like the prevalence of the process addiction, I knew it was a thing, but, just hearing you guys talk about, all the different ones, I mean, it's definitely a lot more prevalent than we think. But I think my main takeaway and one that I'm going to take to my practice was, I mentioned that, there's a lot of kids that, feel isolated because they can't relate to the people that are with that are playing video games and that are inside addicted to tech all day, because they're the ones trying to get outside because their parents are trying to, break that model. And I do a lot of individual counseling. I don't do a lot of work with families and couples. So I think just that's going to be a good opportunity for me to, get the whole family in there and just really encourage that conversation of, hey, you guys got to get with, parents that are like-minded and get your kids with these people so we can break that mold.
I would also say that at Zephyr, we don't do fix my kid policy, and it doesn't read like that. But in the intake paperwork, it says, parents as the executives of your homes, as go you, so go your children. We're going to work with you. This isn't jujitsu. You don't drop them off for an hour and a half and then come back and they have some new skills. You got to change the environment. So yeah, I think you're on the right track there. You're going to find that family work is both challenging and highly rewarding, and I believe it's actually way more efficient when you have more people in the room. It's tougher because you're having to play traffic cop as people are talking at each other, but like it's way more efficient if done well. So good for you for jumping on that, Kevin. Wrap us up.
I just like having conversations about this. I know we were going to lunch, in December, and you didn't even realize the depth of microtransactions and how they relate to
Yeah.
like the gaming industry and all those things. So having these conversations so people can better understand how to do it, and looking at a challenge of trying to be better myself and with my wife, create healthy habits that aren't weaning into the addictions of social media and our phones. So then we can better set our children up to not suffer the same thing and be present in their lives. I know we go to swim and there's people buried in their phones while their kids swimming, and they'll look to them for
Yeah.
some kind of feedback or reaction, and they're buried in the phone and miss that. And
It's
yeah,
so sad.
I have moments of that too, when there's maybe a work text that I think's important, and our daughter might ask something, and I miss that, but I strive to be better, and it's okay. All these things are designed to be addictive, so we don't need to strive to be perfect, but just strive to be better.
I would submit that will also improve the intimacy between you and your wife when you have those conversations, because they're as intimate as discussing finances. When you're discussing how you're going to set your own guardrails on technology in the home, it is very, very intimate. I think a lot of people think of intimacy as sexual intimacy only, and it's not at all the case. Emotional intimacy is really what we want, and discussing important topics like preparedness and finances, which is preparedness. It goes way beyond what do you want for dinner, right? So I think you're going to find an improved relationship there as you have these, and I don't mean just you, but y'all listening. You're going to have an improved relationships when you discuss the things that matter most. So with that, thank you everybody for listening, and please, again, as I mentioned in the beginning, share it around if you find it useful. That's how we go make Earth better. And on behalf of our entire Walk the Talk America family, we wish you all great mental wellness. Bye-bye.